The hill I couldn't climb. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, I believed I was the kind of person who always quit halfway. It wasn't something I admitted proudly. It was simply the truth I carried, quietly and heavily, like a stone in my pocket. School competitions, personal goals, hobbies, every time things got difficult, I stopped trying. The turning point of my life began with a hill. Not a metaphorical hill. A real one. It stood behind my grandmother's old house in the countryside. The locals called it Hawk Hill because hawks circled around its peak every morning. Growing up, I had always dreamed of reaching the top, but the hill was steep, rocky, and intimidating. I always gave up halfway, blaming the heat, the stones, or my own lack of strength. When I was 24, after failing an important job interview, I returned to my grandmother's house to reset my mind, or at least that was the excuse I gave myself. In truth, I felt like a failure again. My grandmother, however, welcomed me with her warm smile and a plate of steamed sweet potatoes, as if I had brought home a victory. That evening, as we sat outside watching the sunset, she said something I didn't expect. "You know, Danny," she began, "I still fixed on the horizon, your grandfather climbed Hawk Hill every single week. Even on the days he couldn't walk straight." I laughed a little. Grandpa was strong. I'm not him. She turned to me, her voice gentle but firm. "No one is asking you to be him. But you should learn why he kept climbing." Her words lingered in my mind like an unfinished melody. The first attempt. The next morning, I decided to climb Hawk Hill again. I wasn't expecting anything. I didn't have a grand plan. I simply didn't want to spend another day feeling useless. The air was crisp as I began walking. The trail was narrower than I remembered and even steeper. Halfway up, my legs burned. My breath was heavy. Sweat clung to my back like a second shirt. "I can't do this," I muttered to myself. And once again, like I had done countless times in my life, I turned back. My grandmother didn't scold me. She simply handed me a glass of water and said, "How was the climb?" "Terrible," I admitted. "I quit." She smiled, not disappointed, not surprised. "Well, then tomorrow, quit a little later." The second attempt. Her word stuck with me. So, the next morning, I tried again. This time, I told myself, just 10 more steps after the point where I usually give up. 10 steps became 15. 15 became 20. But eventually, the familiar exhaustion returned. And again, I turned back. When I got home, my grandmother was kneading dough. She didn't even look up when she asked, "Quit later today?" "A bit," I said. She nodded. "Good. Tomorrow, quit even later." I didn't know why her faith in me felt heavier than my failures, but it did. The third attempt. On the third morning, I climbed with stubborn determination. My body complained. My lungs protested. But I pushed and pushed, and finally, I reached a large flat rock near the top. It wasn't the summit, but it was the closest I had ever been. I almost cried. That evening, my grandmother brought out an old notebook, yellowed pages filled with my grandfather's handwriting. This was his climbing journal, she said. He wrote something every time he climbed Hawk Hill. I opened the book, expecting heroic words. Instead, I found: "Legs hurt like hell today. Slipped 3 times. Almost gave up. Didn't reach the top. Didn't reach the top. Didn't reach the top." For pages and pages, my grandfather wrote about failure. Then, on one page near the end, "Finally reached the summit. Only took me 22 years. I stared at the sentence for a long time. 22 years. More than 2 decades of failing, but trying again. Suddenly, the hill felt different. It wasn't an obstacle. It was an invitation. The final attempt. The next morning, I climbed with a different heart. The sun rose behind me, painting my shadow long across the path. The wind whistled between the rocks. Every step was a test, but every step also whispered my grandfather's words. Didn't reach the top yet. When I reached the familiar flat rock, I didn't stop. I pushed onward. My legs shook. My breath trembled. My mind screamed for me to quit. But this time, I didn't listen. Step by step, I kept moving until finally, the ground leveled. And there it was. The summit. The hawks circled overhead, wings outstretched like silent guardians. The view stretched endlessly, green fields, silver rivers, the tiny roof of my grandmother's house. I felt small. But not weak. Never weak again. I sat there for a long time, letting the wind carry away the last pieces of the person who always quit. When I returned home, my grandmother didn't ask me anything. She just looked at my dirt-covered clothes and my face, and she knew. She said softly, "Now you understand." I did. The hill was never about the climb. It was about who I became because I didn't quit. Years later, I eventually found a job I loved, not because it was easy, but because I had learned how to push beyond difficulty. Whenever work became overwhelming, I remembered the hill. Whenever I felt like giving up, I told myself, quit later. Quit after one more step. But I never quit. Every success I achieved afterward, every goal reached, every challenge overcome, started on that hill. The hill I couldn't climb. Until I did.